what do those people need? So that, the millions of small businesses out there, people who are trying to figure out their own kitchen table financial positions, or trying to figure out whether they can afford to buy a home and so forth. What do they need that we're not giving them?
Sure. So as you know, I start off the book with a small business owner who owns a company called Captain Cookie and the Milkman. And they have locations in Washington and New York and in North Carolina. And what she is really looking for is news and information about where they should be opening up new locations, where they should be expanding. And she's not getting that from the local business news organizations. She's not getting coverage that tells her like where new strip malls are being built, or where new major retail economic development plans are being built. And so she's actually going directly to the local zoning and planning websites and looking up the information herself to get that information. So it's things like that. It's things like, if I'm a small business owner, what's the current economy like in my town or my city, in my metropolitan statistical area? Is it growing? It's expanding. What's the job market like in that metropolitan statistical area? Is it growing? What types of jobs are growing? Things like that we're not providing. And when I say we, business journalism in general, not providing to these business owners. For consumers, it's, really, we're not giving them the information that we were giving them 25, 30 years ago about like what's happening with local inflation, or what's happening with local prices, or what companies are hiring, or what companies are laying off. That news is just not being covered. There's another example in the book about a hospital in Georgia that filed plans to expand. Obviously, vitally important news to that local economy, but wasn't reported anywhere.
So you lay some pretty big consequences on this absence of local business coverage and the rise of maybe we should call it extreme finance journalism for the people who are very wealthy investors, or who are traders, or who are executives. One of them is the rise of inequality. Grows out of this, maybe not completely, but in part grows out of this absence of local news coverage. Can you explain that?
Sure. It's part of the diversity problem in business journalism, in that vast majority of business journalists are white men. But some of the most important business and economics news stories out there, at least at the local level, is what's happening in minority communities and what's happening for minority businesses. I have in the book the fact that minority businesses actually fared better during the economic recession of 2007, 2008, 2009. But if you look at the coverage during that time period, they were virtually ignored in terms of what they were doing that made them more successful than white-owned businesses. Minority-owned businesses and minority consumers have really kind of unique obstacles and challenges that really are not being covered in business and financial news. They invest differently. They save differently. They spend their money differently on what they spend on consumer products, but nobody's really covering that. So that's the issue.
Okay. You do have some criticisms of the successful big media companies that do a good job covering business, but you do think that they cater to people who want to read about business news as if it were a sport almost. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I call this the ESPNification of business journalism,
Yeah.
in that particularly when it comes to like CNBC and Fox Business and a lot of other news coverage of business and economics, they cover it like a sport. Um, Stock market is a classic example
Yeah.
in that a lot of stock market coverage is winners and losers of that
Yeah.
day. When winners and losers in a single day in the stock market is really not important to the average consumer who is invested into the stock market. They really should be long-term investors and not focused on what's happening in the stock market on a daily basis. But if you click on CNBC at 4 o'clock when the market closes, it's all about the winners and the losers that day, and what you should be doing, and professional investors giving you advice. And that's really not what most people need to hear.
Yeah. They also use sports terminology,
Yeah.
about crashing and pummeling and catapulting, and it makes it seem like, this is something that you, viewer, that I think I see this mostly in broadcast news, but some in print too, makes it seem like you're missing out on something if you're not involved in this. You're not a player.
Yeah. I've got a whole section in the book about the verbs that business journalists use when they write about the market, and how most of the time the verbs are really over the top,
Yeah.
and really making it more dramatic than it really needs to be.
Yeah. I think if you asked reporters who have to write about the stock market every day, if they would rather not write about the stock market every day, they'd say yes. So they use those verbs or those adjectives because they need to.
Yeah. In doing research for the book, I actually talked to a couple of stock market reporters about their job off the record, and I consistently heard from them, the struggle to come up with something new and different every day to say about what was going on
Yeah.
in the market, and the fact that even though they were interviewing traders and other people on a daily basis, they really were having to extrapolate and make assumptions about the broader market
Yeah.
that they weren't confident was actually what was causing the market to move.